of law, democracy, and participation of the people are some of the principles that are supposed to guide the governance and the implementation of any public policy, Mr. Speaker. A respect to human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusiveness, equality, human rights, non-discrimination, and protection of the marginalized, Mr. Speaker. And when I look at Article 10(1)(c), Mr. Speaker, about good governance, integrity, transparency, and accountability, and having regard to sustainable development, if only we had paid more attention, Mr. Speaker, as public officers, as state officers, would we have been where we were last week on Tuesday, Mr. Speaker? I specifically look at the Senate, the role of Senate, as laid out, very well laid out in the Constitution, on issues of good governance, transparency, and accountability, and the fact that we have a function of oversight over the counties. Is there anything we could have done better than how we have done? Maybe yes, Mr. Speaker, maybe there are areas, and there are areas that we need to improve also as a House, Mr. Speaker. The storm we saw in this nation, sweeping this nation, Mr. Speaker, and Parliament being at the eye of this storm, it was also an indictment to the institution of Parliament. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, and to follow what the other speakers have said, because today is not a day of competing on who gives a better speech or who does better debating than the other, I want to apologize that if we have failed as senators, Mr. Speaker, we are sorry. I am sorry, Mr. Speaker. Are there any tools that would have enhanced transparency, that would have slowed down issues of corruption? Mr. Speaker, I have served in other respects, even as a Secretary General of the ruling party, former Secretary General of the ruling party, Mr. Speaker. And I know for a fact it is possible to run a system without collecting a bribe, from my own experience, Mr. Speaker. And I want, as we do this debate, Mr. Speaker, that first of all, it forms a platform for us to have an introspection as Senate, Mr. Speaker. That our tool, when we do the CPIC and the CPAC committees, what do we do with the reports that emanate from counties where we can see that corruption is rampant, Mr. Speaker? It is my view that as a way of improving the system so that we can have the public inject their confidence once again in this institution, is that the reporting back of those notorious counties should come back to the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker, and action must be taken. Concerted, Mr. Speaker, collective action, agreed upon all the senators, that what needs to be done by EACC with counties that have had wanton corruption and misuse of public fund, Mr. Speaker, that concrete action must be taken. And Mr. Speaker, we have also had a chance as a House to look at some of the impeachment proceedings. It has also given us time to reflect, Mr. Speaker, on how we have conducted those proceedings and whether they have met the expectation, the legitimate expectation, Mr. Speaker, of the population, Mr. Speaker. To the Gen Z who have woken us up, Mr. Speaker, and who have called institutions to rethink how we are conducting our business, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, these being our children, they have done well and in a very bold way. Without any experience, without having any forms of arms, Mr. Speaker, they came out to resoundingly say something must change. And the finance bill was the trigger, Mr. Speaker. They were not comfortable with how that finance bill was phrased, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that they felt they were not listened to. Was this an expression of just the Gen Z? Maybe it was an expression of many more Kenyans who may not have had an opportunity to express themselves. Mr. Speaker, these young people came out as true patriots, tribalists, without any boundary, Mr. Speaker. They defeated the class division, and they came out, Mr. Speaker, to speak resoundingly. My only unfortunate moment, Mr. Speaker, was when the demonstration was infiltrated and turned violent, Mr. Speaker, and there was a standoff between the demonstrators and the law enforcement and security officers, Mr. Speaker. The conflict that ended up landing some of them into mortuaries, Mr. Speaker. And as Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, we need to have a retrospection of all the officers, the state officers, who are seated in public offices. If there was something that was happening that was off and had a tendency to have a corrupt tag, this means the storm now must stop on corrupt practices, Mr. Speaker. Let everybody look through how they are conducting their affairs, beginning with us, Mr. Speaker, because today we are talking about ourselves, more of ourselves. How are we conducting our affairs? For those who are Christians like myself, the good book will guide us into what is godly order. For those who are Muslims, Mr. Speaker, while we are guided by the Bible, the Muslims will be guided by the Quran. But for the nation, Mr. Speaker, we have the Constitution that guides how governance must be done and how structures should be laid out, Mr. Speaker. Where we have gone wrong, Mr. Speaker, does that Constitution offer us an avenue of ventilation? Mine is to call upon the Gen Z. Now that we have begun to listen to what they have to say, mine is to call upon the Gen Z to allow us to walk the order of the Constitution, to accept that an olive branch now has been given by our President, Mr. Speaker, and that is the highest level of executive commitment, that the President is willing to have a forum with the young people, with the Gen Z, and discuss issues that need to be thrashed out, Mr. Speaker, must be taken as a sign of very, very goodwill, Mr. Speaker. And there are those issues that have been laid out. Is it possible for a nation to change within a day? Is it possible for a nation to change within a day? I see it has signaled an opportunity for us to begin the change. And while all the demands may not be met overnight within a week, within 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker, yet some of those things that are glaring, Mr. Speaker, like dealing with the corrupt cases, dealing with issues that are obvious and that have evidence, Mr. Speaker, that ball should begin rolling, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because if we cannot face the change, then change will change us, Mr. Speaker. It is my view, Mr. Speaker, that if we can honestly face ourselves, the society to face itself, EACC to also come out of slumber, take up those files, prosecute those that need to be prosecuted where there is sufficient evidence, Mr. Speaker, that corruption has happened within institutions, Mr. Speaker, then even the Gen Z will begin to see that we are serious and committed to upholding the dignity of every Kenyan, Mr. Speaker. Regarding the jobs, it is true, Mr. Speaker, there has been, the youth have faced a lot of unemployment, and I can only imagine how distressing, Mr. Speaker, this is when a young person has gone through schooling and has nothing to do, Mr. Speaker, and yet we are supposed to give solutions as leaders, Mr. Speaker. Those are issues that now need to be tackled in a different way. Is there bias in the way public office employs young people? Mr. Speaker, we need to straighten out the processes. We need to do things, Mr. Speaker, in a different way. And I want to specifically look at the suggestion that has been done by SRC for the raising the salary, Mr. Speaker, of the senators and members of parliament, Mr. Speaker. That proposal, while it may have been good because everybody needs a raise at any point when they are working, a worker needs to be motivated, the timing is so wrong and it is not needed, Mr. Speaker. Least of all by the honorable members. I haven't met one single member still, Mr. Speaker, and I'm only repeating this because it has been said But we are repeating it to affirm the fact, Mr. Speaker, that none of these officers seated here today, none of these legislators had asked for that increment. And we would call upon the SRC to be a little bit more serious with their tasks. They have a heavy, their in-tray is full with claims by intern doctors, Mr. Speaker, with claims from JSS, Mr. Speaker, the teachers in JSS, Mr. Speaker. Have those issues been handled yet? Are there opportunities where young people could be accommodated within the public sector, where that available funding can then be disbursed towards supporting them, Mr. Speaker? We need to think outside the box and say, let's do things differently, Mr. Speaker, because if we do not do it differently, Mr. Speaker, once again, the change would change us, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the Gen Z and also note that their level of debate, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the fact that there were quite a number of insults that are coming across the X space, I have also equally noted, Mr. Speaker, that these are very young, intelligent Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. Their level of debate is very different from the levels of debates that we are having, Mr. Speaker. And for a moment, I asked myself, could this be the reason that maybe they don't watch the mainstream media? Because their level of analysis of issues was different and was very refined. They have facts and figures. There is nothing you would tell them about who was given which tender, Mr. Speaker. They are able to analyze for you from county number 1 to county number 47, how many tenders have been awarded by each county, who has been awarded, which companies have been awarded, who owns those companies. All that information, Mr. Speaker, is with the Gen Z. I must commend the level of transparency, because it's only when we are transparent and open with ourselves and with the systems and with the processes that change will begin to sweep across the whole nation, Mr. Speaker. All I want to persuade now, Mr. Speaker, to the Gen Z and to the people of Kenya, we have a nation. Many of us do not have an alternative to our nation, our statehood here. We belong to Kenya, Mr. Speaker. We are Kenyan citizens, Mr. Speaker. We do not even have dual citizenship, some of us. We have no other home except this home called Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, Kenya has been like a labor ward for many nations in this region, especially in the Great Lakes region, Mr. Speaker. And we must preserve our nationhood. We call for peace. We call for the end of the demonstrations, Mr. Speaker, and we allow dialogue to happen. We allow an opportunity for us to sit together. And I want to say to the Gen Z, who are our children actually? I'm a mother to 3 Gen Zs, Mr. Speaker, that if they ever had a friend, they have a friend in Senate. We are open to receive every petition. We are open to listen to them. We are open to see the issues that they don't agree, Mr. Speaker, with us, Mr. Speaker, and we are ready to implement what we can legislatively do to ensure that their confidence in us, Mr. Speaker, is restored. And I have also noted, Mr. Speaker, that they had very big issues also with the church. For some, they supported the church. For some, they had very big issues with the church and religious institutions, Mr. Speaker. And that has also now called for change in the way we conduct public officers, conduct their business with religious bodies, Mr. Speaker, so that if the fundraisers are causing so much trouble and so much drama, then, Mr. Speaker, it is time for us to rethink our position on how we handle that. And I speak that both as a believer and a very strong church member, that it is important we preach this gospel and preach it in such a way that, Mr. Speaker, it is acceptable not only to our age group, but it's also acceptable to our young children, acceptable to our young adults, acceptable to the students, and acceptable to the whole population, Mr. Speaker. This is an issue that has been pending on our in-tray, and a lot of pressure has come on the politicians also, if we can be honest about the fundraisers. Mr. Speaker, because when your competitor, as a politician, gives some money for fundraiser, which another politician cannot match, Mr. Speaker, instantly there is a liking by the public towards the one who is giving, and the one who is not giving is seen as though they are not working, Mr. Speaker. So the definition of public work or public service has to now be separated from fundraiser aspect, Mr. Speaker, so that a legislator who is supposed to be in Parliament doing oversight, doing legislation, doing representation, Mr. Speaker, must not be seen as a money-minting machine. So we need to slow down, even as Kenyans, how we conduct our business with the public officers. For instance, when a Kenyan is paying a bribe to a police officer, is it a member of Parliament who asked them to pay that bribe? Maybe not, Mr. Speaker. It's a cultural change. And what the Gen Zs have said is that it is time for us to change our culture. We must be able to offer an environment, a governance environment, Mr. Speaker, where we can work 24 hours. We work daytime, we work at night, and women and children will have the security to walk through the streets, Mr. Speaker, and be able to conduct their businesses within a 24-hour economy. Mr. Speaker, I know Kenyans are smart people. We have seen the wanton destruction of property. My deepest apologies to all the business people who have suffered losses, heavy losses, and as a result of which a number of people may equally lose jobs. Young people will lose jobs, Mr. Speaker. That's an unfortunate position, one which we should not have found ourselves in. I walked through Mamagina Street, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, and all those businesses, they have been broken. Some criminals broke into those businesses, Mr. Speaker, and took away the stocks that were in that shop. The display windows are gone, Mr. Speaker. They need to not only repair the premises, but restock the businesses before they can give anybody any job. That is not a position we would wish to be in, Mr. Speaker. And it's my very humble plea to Kenyans that we allow ourselves to go back to normal day, Mr. Speaker, when there is a busy activity in Mamagina Street, in downtown, Mr. Speaker, in the uptown, Mr. Speaker, in our malls, Mr. Speaker, and what we have seen happening to Quickmart must not happen to any other business in the Republic of Kenya. For a very long time, Kenya has been setting the trend for the East African region and has been setting the trend for the Great Lakes region and in Africa, Mr. Speaker, and we must allow ourselves to bounce our nation back to a position of being a great example to be emulated in Africa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
Senator Okongo Mogene.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to also contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I stand to support the bipartisan approach that has been adopted by the majority side and the minority. So I want to thank Senator Cheriot, our youthful leader, majority leader from the majority side, and our elder, Justice Retired Stuart Mazayo, who under the leadership of Senator Wambua have brought us together to have a discourse as Kenyans. We thank you, our dear colleagues. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I first want to pass my message of condolences to the mothers, the fathers, brothers and sisters of the 34, I'm told now it's 34, Kenyans who lost their lives during these demonstrations. Mr. Speaker, as a father, as a son to a mother, it's a painful thing to lose a son or a daughter, especially one who has given himself or herself to fight for a just cause, to make this country better, Mr. Speaker. These fallen heroes, Mr. Speaker, were motivated by one desire to improve the landscape of our governance. They wanted to make the lives of many of us better, Mr. Speaker. And there are many of us, Mr. Speaker, who have benefited from this very courageous Gen Z generation that put the government on toes by the demonstration. Mr. Speaker, as a lawyer, I know that the right to picket, the right to demonstrate, the right to withdraw support from a government is enshrined in our Constitution, as long as it's peaceful and geared to passing a message to the government of the day. So it's something that, Mr. Speaker, we cannot fail to acknowledge that the Gen Zs have a right, Mr. Speaker, to picket, to demonstrate. And world all over, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are people who have led peaceful protests and they have changed the world, Mr. Speaker. We know, Mr. Speaker, that in 1964, the celebrated Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States of America led the march to Washington that led to the enactment of the Civil Rights Act in the United States of America that gave Americans their civil rights, Mr. Speaker. So we regret, Mr. Speaker, that there are Kenyans, I'm told about 8 of them, who lost their lives within the precincts of Parliament. That is regrettable, Mr. Speaker, and it's my prayer and wish, Mr. Speaker, that as we move forward, we also demand for accountability from our security forces, Mr. Speaker. We know that a well-trained police force that follows what Kenyans passed when we enacted the 2010 Constitution. In Chapter 14, they know that they are supposed to be guided by principles of human rights, rule of law, democracy, Mr. Speaker. And the rule of law, Mr. Speaker, dictates that if you come across a demonstrator who has broken the law, what we expect as a country is to have that Kenyan arrested and presented before courts of law. That's the only way, Mr. Speaker, we can build a country that truly can pride itself as one that respects and operates within the tenets of the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, we watch international media. We see demonstrations every day. You see them in France, you see them in the United States, we see them in Britain, but hardly will you see cases where police officers will open fire on unarmed demonstrators. We expect, Mr. Speaker, that one of the resolutions we'll make as a committee is to hold accountable the police officers who may have used excessive force. So I mourn with those Kenyans, and I plead that part of the recommendations, Mr. Speaker, should be how we extend assistance to the parents of these children who have lost their loved ones as they prepare for their burial. I applaud the CS Health who released a press release today confirming that the government has waived all the medical bills for those Kenyans. So we must move a step further, Mr. Speaker, and ensure that we extend assistance. Mr. Speaker, this Gen Z, it is this Gen Z that we owe. We failed, me included, in stopping the passage of that very draconian finance bill. If it was not for this Gen Z, that finance bill would be low today. So we owe them. Without them, Senator Kalwale, finance bill 2024 would be low today. That is a reality, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we must also accept as a country that we are in extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary measures from extraordinary leaders, Mr. Speaker. What we have seen is a Gen Z that has demonstrated extraordinary ability. How these young people are able to mobilize and be out in the streets without choosing your social status is amazing, Mr. Speaker. We have children who are in Gen Z generation, whom you may think as fairly privileged, but they identify with the cause of the Gen Z that is in the streets, Mr. Speaker. If you have a son watch how they are hooked to this, it's called X-space conversations, Mr. Speaker. So it tells us, Mr. Speaker, that there is something that we have not done right, Mr. Speaker. I propose, Mr. Speaker, that as we go forward, Mr. Speaker, we must accept that this country is facing a number of challenges and we must look for solutions. Mr. Speaker, the first point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, and I want to speak to the President. The first point, Mr. Speaker, if the President needs to restore respectability, because the public trust on the presidency is at the lowest, Mr. Speaker. If you listen to the X space, even when the President was answering questions, the responses were that we cannot trust him. So the biggest challenge for the President is to win back the public trust, Mr. Speaker. Public trust on the President is at its lowest, Mr. Speaker. So we urge the President to begin by respecting the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Let him begin by respecting the Constitution. And Mr. Speaker, he can go for the low-hanging fruits. We have seen what this Gen Z generation has been posting on social media. The major attack is on how the President has exercised the power before. That is the problem. If we don't acknowledge that as a House, we will not be able to solve the challenges we are facing, Mr. Speaker. The feeling, Mr. Speaker, is that the President has not allowed Parliament, both the Senate and the National Assembly, to carry its duties as an independent institution, Mr. Speaker. Most of these unpopular legislations that triggered these demonstrations were pushed through the two houses. You know about the housing levy that led, it was called Affordable Housing Bill that created the now Affordable Housing Act. It was pushed through, Mr. Speaker. If we had adopted a bipartisan approach, we would have made that law less punitive to Kenyans. Because the cry, if you listen to the young professionals, the young doctors, the young lawyers, they are crying about an invasion on their payslip. Even those who work for Parliament, their cry is that they are facing a government that is raiding their pockets day in, day out. Their pocket was raided in the first budget. Their pocket has been raided in the second budget. Mr. Speaker, this issue of corruption, I want to join my colleague Senator Cheriot that we will not fix it unless we have a radical surgery on EACC, Mr. Speaker. And I will give you an example on what has happened in the county of Nyamira. Mr. Speaker, in the month of August 2022, while we are facing, just in the run-up to the elections, the governor of Nyamira unilaterally paid himself to his account 6.573 million, Mr. Speaker. And I'm speaking here as a person who speaks the truth, and I want to table that payslip before the House. It's here. He paid himself 6.573 billion. A whistleblower, million. The payslip is here, and I beg to table, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when EACC was summoned to Nyamira, instead of recording a statement and taking that governor to court, they got money from him, and then they told him, we can agree, you just refunded the money quietly, Mr. Speaker. What a shame! What a shame, Mr. Speaker. How can that be from a body that is supposed to be fighting corruption, Mr. Speaker? What stops another officer in the county government of Nyamira paying himself, and then when EACC goes, they will say, but you did that to the governor. We also want a settlement, Mr. Speaker. This guy, Governor Amos Nyaribo, Mr. Speaker, should have been arrested, arraigned before a court of law, and a conviction given by the courts, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way you can send a message, Mr. Speaker, that you are intent in fighting corruption. Let me even shock you further, Mr. Speaker, because I've worked with the documents. There was another case, Mr. Speaker. Officers within the county government of Nyamira, Mr. Speaker, hatched a scheme to siphon money from the public coffers of the county government of Nyamira. And they came up with ghost names, whom up to today nobody knows, and they paid them a total of 800,000, Mr. Speaker. These guys were investigated for those offenses, charged with abuse of office. One, Godfrey Kiriago and Geoffrey Nyamagwa, Mr. Speaker, arrested, taken to court for that crime they committed, Mr. Speaker. Once the case was registered, and I have the charge sheet here, as criminal case E510 of 2023, Mr. Speaker, they had a secret meeting with the DPP, Mr. Speaker, and that case, Mr. Speaker, was withdrawn under Section 82(1) of the Criminal Procedure Code, Mr. Speaker. What a shame. Mr. Speaker, when the county government was being summoned to appear in Nairobi, they had the audacity to tell the committee of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, that they have taken action of relieving Mr. Kiriago from service at the county government of Nyamira and send him back to the national government so that he can continue with these fraudulent activities, Mr. Speaker. If this is the kind of conduct we are going to have from the office of EACC, from the office of the DPP, how will we ever fight corruption, Mr. Speaker? And I table this document, Mr. Speaker, before the House so that this conduct of EACC can be on the table. And Mr. Speaker, I'm of the view, Mr. Speaker, that if the Senate of the Republic of Kenya will find these documents to be genuine, then the commissioners at EACC and the CEO of EACC should be the first one to face the chop. Senator Cheriot, we cannot allow that kind of impunity. Mr. Speaker, just to tell you the kind of challenge this country is facing, if you read the auditor's report, Mr. Speaker, it tells you that the county government of Nyamira has exceeded Regulation 22 on personnel emoluments by 22%. It is at 57, and I have the document. And Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the people of Nyamira that if I've said a lie this afternoon, I'll go to Tinga, where I was born, in West Mogirango, Basamaro constituency, and tender my resignation. The documents I'm tendering before this House are authentic. They are from our public offices, from government offices, and just give just a snippet of the kind of rot that we have, Mr. Speaker. Once this report was prepared by the Auditor General, and we got a qualified, audited accounts, Mr. Speaker, saying that our personnel emoluments were at 57%, the governor had the audacity, Mr. Speaker, of proceeding again to advertise and employ a further 200 workers. Meaning, next time the auditors go to Nyamira, it will be at 60-something%. What kind of impunity is this, Mr. Speaker? And I table this report before the Senate. This kind of rot is not just happening in the county government of Nyamira. It's replicated at the national government, Mr. Speaker. The positions of cabinet administrative secretaries are unconstitutional. Their positions should not even exist, Mr. Speaker. But I have information, Mr. Speaker, that the Service Commission trying to push them to appoint those positions. What message are we sending, Mr. Speaker? That is impunity. And I'm urging both members of National Assembly and the Senate, Mr. Speaker, if the President cannot take action, will be prescriptive, Mr. Speaker. These times call for action, and they call for action from us, not yesterday but today. If the president does not have the courage, Mr. Speaker, I beseech us as parliamentarians to come up with an amendment and repeal the National Government Coordination Act that created those positions. That's the only time, Mr. Speaker, will be taken serious, Mr. Speaker. If you read the Constitution in Article 152, Mr. Speaker, it gives the presidency the maximum of the number of CSs you can employ at 22, and then a minimum of 14, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,900 doctors. We are not able to take for internship. Do you call it internship, Dr. Kalwale? For internship, Mr. Kalwale, because we are saying our budget cannot support, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do, or what I expect the president to do, he has so many corrupt cabinet secretaries who are giving the country a bad name. Sack them. Reduce the cabinet to 14. And the money you save, Mr. Speaker, can be used to employ those doctors for internship. Article 155, Mr. Speaker, does not give the number of principal secretaries that we should have as a country. It has been abused. It has been abused. Do we need, honestly, do we need 51 principal secretaries? We don't. We don't. And I'm urging my colleagues, if we agree, Mr. Speaker, we can marshal 2/3. We amend the Constitution, prescribe, put there a maximum of 14 principal secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Because then the youths want to see action from us. Nobody can legislate other than we as senators. Mr. Speaker, why do you create a ministry and then you create 3 departments, Mr. Speaker? I have friends, but I don't have positions to employ all my friends, Mr. Speaker. So we want to urge the president to also talk to his friends and tell them the cake is too small. Not everybody will get a piece, Mr. Speaker. Not everybody will get a piece. Some will get, some will miss, Mr. Speaker. So they cannot put pressure on the president that, you know, I was the candidate in Muhaya, I don't know what, so you must appoint me either ambassador, CS, principal secretary. It cannot work, Mr. Speaker. So if the president does not act within the next 7 days, let us move a constitutional amendment, Mr. Speaker. We be prescriptive. We put the number there, Mr. Speaker. We cap it at 22 maximum, but it can operate with 14. These are extraordinary times. That money we save, Mr. Speaker, we take it and employ JSS teachers, Mr. Speaker. These are the guys who are in the streets demonstrating, Mr. Speaker. We make them also have a bite of the national cake, Mr. Speaker. Instead of saying this cake will only be for principal secretaries, for cabinet secretaries. Cannot be that way, Mr. Speaker. Because this country, we almost lost it, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we don't, but maybe we have been given a second chance, Mr. Speaker. And my brother, Senator Cheruiyot, I compare you with Lyndon Johnson, former president of the United States of America. He became the leader of the Senate while very youthful, but he provided leadership. And he was blessed by Almighty God because he ended up becoming a president of the United States of America. The fact that you have the majority does not mean that you exercise tyranny over Kenyans. I'm telling you, my brother, you can have the numbers, but you can still give leadership. You can create a legacy for yourself. In 1936, when Roosevelt, Franklin, was president of the United States of America, his majority in House of Representatives was 333 members. The opposition had only 89. In the Senate, he had 83. The opposition, Republicans, had only 17. But when he came up with an unpopular legislation to amend the Supreme Court Act to increase the number of judges from 9 to 15, so that he gets himself an opportunity to pick 6, his own party, Democrats, rejected that move. Those were his members of his party. But because they put the interest of the country ahead of the interest of the president, they rejected that move. So we also want to urge our colleagues.
Allow Senator Mogeni 2 minutes to sum up.
Yes. So,
Senator Okenyuri, just have a seat. Before we started this motion, there's some ground rules that every senator taking to the microphone will be allowed to speak their heart uninterrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the point I was making, Mr. Speaker, is that the leadership of the House then was able to put the interest of the country ahead of personal or party interest, Mr. Speaker. We have a bloated cabinet, Mr. Speaker. Not cabinet, we have a bloated government. I want to conclude by urging my colleagues to reconsider an audit of the 2010 Constitution, Mr. Speaker. We have so many constitutional commissions with people serving part-time but doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, how can a body that reviews my salary once a year be working from Monday to Friday? This body called, how? Mr. Speaker, that you sit to review the salary of Senator Mogeni from January to December, Monday to Friday. How can you? Then Mr. Speaker, and I'm rejecting that offer. Then after you have reviewed that for the whole of 1 year, you tell me I've reviewed you with 14,000, which I don't want. Don't want it. We cannot, Mr. Speaker. So we must audit this constitution, Mr. Speaker. Some of these guys who are earning huge amount of salary, Mr. Speaker, we convert them to part-time. That's what the Gen Zs want us to do, Mr. Speaker. If you go to the judiciary, Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford this idea of employing judges left, center, and right, Mr. Speaker. It's not easy to maintain a judge. When you employ a judge, you must give them a car, you must pay them house. We have a judge here, we will tell you. It's not easy, Mr. Speaker. The other day, a motion was taken to the National Assembly. It never came to us. The number of judges of Court of Appeal increased to 70. You have special courts, land and environment. You see they can employ up to 100. Labor, Mr. Speaker, you are a lawyer. A judge was posted to Kilgoris to deal with land matters, stayed there for 3 months. Then they left because there were no cases. Senator Viga, a judge was sent to your county. Esther, she's a kiss. After 6 months, she went away. There are no cases. Another one went to Malindi. After staying there for 7 months, there were no more cases. How can that be? They made a presentation before us. Senator Chirioto was there. And they proposed that we should...
Senator S.C. Okenyuri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. And let me just clarify, I was not interjecting my senior Senator Omogeni. I was bringing to your attention that in as much as we are pressing these gadgets, our names do not reflect where the clerks are. So I want to appreciate, because I've been literally on my knees since morning, want to engaging on this issue. Mr. Speaker, first, I want to give my condolences to the families who lost their young people amid the ongoing protests, starting with one Rex Masai and several others whose names I might not mention on this floor, Mr. Speaker. You can actually see, if we have to strain to even get a chance to speak, and yet we represent young people in this house, what about the several young people who are watching us to air their issues in this house, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, whatever issues that have been brought by the Gen Zs are not new issues in this country. Look at the issue of restructuring government. We had the Abdikadir report of 2015 that actually listed the parastatals in this country and how to deal with different policy issues that were affecting each. Mr. Speaker, we do not need a repeat of the same. We have very intelligent Kenyans who've gone down and actually done this work and given recommendations, which those recommendations are gathering dust in the name of reports which have never been implemented to date, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of Gen Z is not going to be forgotten anytime soon. It will keep reoccurring. But I want to urge that let it not be that we have to have protests for issues regarding young people, Kenyans, to be heard. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the reasons why generally people feel like maybe we are not listening. Mr. Speaker, when you look at some of the issues they seconded, if I refer to DCI, DCI needs to conclude their investigations on some of the people who are arrested. IPOA also needs to swing into action. An organization like NCIC should be disbanded with immediate effect, Mr. Speaker, because a lot of hate is going around all over and no one is doing anything about it, Mr. Speaker. We cannot, those are some of the organizations which are siphoning public resources without nabbing people who are actually giving hate to the public and inciting the public, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I also talk about the matter where SRC is recommending a pay rise for legislators, I want to turn down that in particular, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the newspaper headlines tomorrow will be reading that MPs protest pay rises. Mr. Speaker, it can't be that when one issue is good for the other, it's bad for another. When corruption in the national government is mentioned, let the county government also be mentioned, Mr. Speaker. The money that SRC wants to add us should go into putting that money together so that JSS teachers can be employed, more equipping of public health facilities, so that Kenyans generally get the services they rightfully require, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to indicate that social media is a very active tool, and I salute the young people for their for agitating for change in this country, Mr. Speaker. We didn't have to wait for the young people to set direction, because sometimes, starting with this House, we are told of ranking members, so we are borrowing from those who have come before us. But in this case, the list of the expected in society are the ones who are now giving direction, Mr. Speaker. That needs to be something we as a House need to reflect about and not just leave it to maybe the President to implement. The President has already invited the young people on X tomorrow, and I want to encourage most of them to flood that space and raise whatever issues they have to do with how best we can change leadership in this country. But as much as that is left to the President, we as politicians also need to put a hand in playing a role to fight corruption, Mr. Speaker. Because corruption, I actually think Kenyans generally, we are born with an affinity towards wanting to do something to get something in return. Mr. Speaker, we want a society where for me to ascend to power, it shouldn't be about my DNA or sexual orientation, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way we can encourage young people who are watching me this afternoon from different rural villages to also be good in whatever they are doing and call a spade, Mr. Speaker. As I come down to conclude what I actually had to say this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, We've had several recommendations from serious reports that have been written in this country. We need to revisit the recommendation by those reports, like the Abdul Qadir Mohammed report actually mentions most of these state corporations that should be wound up, or how to better transform them so that services can be given to the people. We cannot purely make those corporations avenues to give jobs to people who have already exceeded their usefulness, Mr. Speaker. We have several young people who are looking into these jobs. And by the way, most of the young people who are demonstrating, they are able to do whatever works they do, like in the digital economy. Most of them are earning online. So whatever they want to be implemented by the government currently is to ensure that they have a conducive environment whereby they can smoothly make their money, so that we are not making them poor and creating paradises for ourselves, Mr. Speaker. As I conclude and take a seat, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that let us not downplay the whole issue of agitation for change in this country. It's real. I have most of my friends who are actually on the streets, and I couldn't actually tell them anything, because then they will think I'm here to praise and worship the government that has given me an appointment. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it's also good to speak the truth as it is, because it is in one way that we make our governance better, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want today to say maybe otherwise what I wouldn't have said in my few remaining years in this House. To the President, we need radical changes. People need to see heads rolling. Mr. Speaker, we've had people who've been implicated in several scandals which are well known to public domain. Politics should be separated with friendship. If you hold on to your friends, Mr. President, we unfortunately might sink down with them. So separate friendship from work. We are here to support your agenda. I believed in your agenda and I still do, but we need to separate the politics from friendship for us to steer this nation forward, so that we don't see the unnecessary issues we are seeing now. Because as we see now, the protesters have been infiltrated by anarchists who want to take us back to where we have been. Mr. Speaker, this is not about Gen Z. It should be a general call by Kenyans, and let it start with we members of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to say that I support this motion, but hoping that we will bring amendments so that all the good things that members are talking here will also be captured in that motion. I will start by sending my condolences to the family, friends of those who have lost their lives. There are over 30 people, but we hope the exact number is going to be provided. Mr. Speaker, I also want to express my sympathies to the family of those people who lost their lives within the precincts of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that Parliament requires to be cleansed, because the blood of innocent Kenyans is within the presence of Parliament, and I hope those of us who believe in prayers will have prayers to also cleanse Parliament, so that we continue as a holy institution, as a sacred institution, and as a respected institution. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Senate leadership, led by yourselves and the minority and majority leaders, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, as we are reflecting on what is happening in our nation, the house that has caused all this problem, they are in hiding, Mr. Speaker. They are in hiding. Many of them are hiding from the people. Many of them don't want to be seen in public because they know what they did was not right. And the Senate has taken up the challenge of being a house of reason to discuss these issues freely. And I just hope, Mr. Speaker, whatever we discuss here, we debate here, should not just end with this debate, but we should have a system of ensuring that whatever we talk about here is actually implemented. I think that will be the main challenge as we debate this particular motion, that what strategies are we going to employ to ensure the many good things we have discussed are implemented. Mr. Speaker, I think the protest by the Gen Zs is a awakening call to the government and to the entire population of Kenya. And this is a moment that we require to reflect and reset our nation, reset this Senate, reset the National Assembly, and reset all the state organs so that they comply to the wishes of the many Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to all the speakers who had an opportunity to speak to this motion. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to divert a bit and say the problem of this nation is here. The problem of this nation is with the Parliament of Kenya. The problem of this, the other institution that is responsible for our problem is the presidency. And we have not talked eloquently about that. I want to take this chance to talk about that, Mr. Speaker. Parliament, what happened to Parliament? Parliament was a holy institution that was always on the side of the people. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, when I was a student at the university here, long before I knew I would become a politician, I used to come to the public galleries to watch Boni, Khalwale here, Onyonka here, debate. To debate. And I used to enjoy the debate, Mr. Speaker. I used to enjoy the debate because they were debating openly and there was no fear. And they were there for the people of Kenya. But Parliament of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not accusing anyone, we have descended. Parliamentary democracy has descended in this country. When we talk about all the omissions that we have talked about, someone listening to us will ask, what have you people done? All this has happened under your watch. What have you done? When we say the IG should be removed from office, what has Parliament done? That is National Assembly and the Senate. So we stand to be blamed by Kenyans. And when we reflect, I think a lot of reflection has to be focused on Parliament. Mr. Speaker, we have allowed Parliament to be an appendage of the state. We have allowed Parliament to be an appendage of state. How do you feel when before a critical bill before the House, parliamentary group meetings are held in State House? Mr. Speaker, I think we need to change the standing orders. so that all parliamentary group meetings are held within the presence of Parliament. Even my own party, ODM, we should hold our meetings within the presence of Parliament. Let our leader come here and chair our meetings. Let President RUTO come to this Parliament and chair the parliamentary group meeting within the presence of Parliament. The idea of us being taken to State House and given orders on how to operate in this house, how to vote, has to stop from today. Mr. Speaker, we always start on a wrong note when we have a new Parliament, that even our own leadership for parliamentary committees and especially departmental committees, it is decided in State House. And our own secretariats here in Parliament just facilitates that. We need to ensure parliamentary democracy comes back, so that let the members of the committee freely elect their leader. Because I have served in the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and I saw chairs of committees were behaving like PS to cabinet secretaries. How will they oversight cabinet secretary when you as a chair, you are very cozy with the cabinet secretary? You go to his office to drink tea in the morning, to eat lunch, seek favors, and this person is supposed to appear before you to answer questions. How is it possible? Honorable members, I think before we blame any other institution, we have to start here. We remember in 2008, when Marende was the Speaker of the National Assembly, when everyone thought that the country was going to burn, Parliament stood and united the country through the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have done so well as a Speaker. But I'm sorry, the Speaker of the National Assembly has let us down. Because you cannot be a Speaker of the National Assembly and then over the weekend you put on party colors. To go to meetings, political meetings, make political statements. I'm the kingpin of the Luya. I am the party leader of this party. We need to have speakers who are impartial, who are independent,
Senator,
so that they can lead us on the way. Honorable Wakoli, my friend, we are reflecting. Allow us to reflect.
Just take a second.
Allow us to reflect. Allow us to reflect. Allow us to reflect.
Order, Honorable Senator.
I am saying this.
Senator Osotsi, just take a seat. Honorable Senators, we have started so well. Order, Honorable Senators. Before debate started on this particular motion, we said because of the sensitivity and where we are, we allow ourselves to ventilate as much as we can with less interruption. Many of the statements that are going to be made here may touch us not in a friendly way, but yet they have to be said if you're to move forward. So, honorable senators, if we have to move forward, we need to face each other and speak the truth. And ordinarily the truth, no matter the pain that truth may cause, if you're to move forward. And therefore, Honorable Wakoli, when I give you the opportunity, you will have a chance to correct facts that you feel they were not put in the correct fashion. So kindly allow Senator Osotsi to complete his intervention, And thereafter, when you rise, you will have that opportunity to put your case as you see, as you deem it fit. Proceed, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't intend to hurt my good friend, the Speaker of the National Assembly, but this is a moment of reflection, and this is something I've thought. I have seen the norms, parliamentary norms, even within the Commonwealth. And it may not be there in the Constitution that the Speaker has to be aligned in some manner, but the norms, the global norms are there. And for us to ensure Parliament is respected, let us have the people who preside over the House, in this case the speakers, not be involved in active politicking over the weekend. And that is the line that I was taking. And if for any good reason that I have offended the Honorable Wakoli and his party leader, I want to apologize, but to say that I'm reflecting on that. Mr. Speaker, still talking about parliamentary democracy. Mr. Speaker, when you go to National Assembly, and I think even here, there are words on the door that says, for the welfare of society and a just government of the people. Those words are not there for nothing. They mean something. They talk about welfare of the society. The society is the country. The just government of the people. That should be the words or the phrases that are supposed to guide us in this House. The moment we divert from that and start engaging as political parties or as an appendage of state, we lose it completely. So I think, for me, that would be an important thing. Mr. Speaker, this House has done public participation. But public participation in this country means nothing, Mr. Speaker. They did public participation over housing bill. They did public participation over the first, the finance bill 2023, and even the recent one, finance 2023-24. But the views of Kenyans were not factored in the final report that was presented to the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, these are the things that annoy the people and make us look bad. So even as we are reflecting, I hope that we will have a committee or we'll have some people sitting down and discussing how do we reset Parliament to be what it was and not what we are having now. So, Mr. Speaker, I started by saying that the problem is here, and that is why I'm addressing Parliament. Now let me go to the presidency. Let me go to the presidency, which is the second problem. Mr. Speaker, the presidency must understand that they are in power. They are no longer campaigning. We know they gave us promises. Some of those promises have not been implemented. Kenyans are patient. They are waiting. But don't continue giving promise after promise. Every day you wake up, new promise has come. And sometimes those promises are not consistent. They are not consistent. And Kenyans now, when the Kenyans start having doubt in their leader, when their leader speaks and they say, we know he's not going to say the truth, then we have a problem. So my view is that the presidency needs to understand, and this is what Honorable Halwale said, there are many institutions that can talk on behalf of the president in government. He doesn't have to talk on everything. He doesn't have to appear all over. President Kibaki led this country from his home. I have met 3 ministers in President Kibaki's government who tell me that in the 10 years that Kibaki was the president, he only called them twice. He only engaged ministers when they go to the cabinet and when you are presenting a memo. But outside that, he would not call you easily. So we have a problem. And I hope the president is listening to me. That, Mr. President, you need to change. And the earlier you change, the better. Talk less, appear less in public, and manage your promises. And that way, Kenya, we will not have this problem. Court orders must be obeyed. I mean, when you tell us that mambo matatu, and you threaten people, you don't obey court orders, we have a problem as a country. When you engage the country at an international level in agreements that hurt the people of Kenya, we have a problem. Because the Constitution is very clear. Treaties must involve Parliament. They must go through Parliament, Mr. Speaker. That is not happening now. So, Mr. President, wherever you are, if you are listening to me as a leader elected by the people of Vihiga, I want to tell you, Mr. President, even as we reflect as the Senate, we also want you to reflect. And members have talked about changing government. I want to say, Mr. President, I think the first thing you need to do, assent to the IBC bill that is before you. The National Assembly has processed the bill. The Senate has processed the bill. The Speaker now has given a report from the National Assembly. The next thing, this evening, Mr. President, sign the IBC into law so that we start having an IBC in place. Mr. Speaker, overhaul of the cabinet. Most of the cabinet members are incompetent. Cabinet secretaries, most of them are incompetent. They are very incompetent. Today, you will hear a cabinet secretary making a pronunciation on a matter that is touching on another ministry. And you wonder, is this government not coordinating? The matter of reduction of government ministry, I think is logical. The number of principal secretaries is actually bloated, and I think it's important for the numbers to be reduced. Mr. Speaker, on another topic of budget making. Mr. Speaker, we know the President has written back to the National Assembly, referring back the finance bill. But if you read Article 115, it talks about Parliament. It talks about Parliament. We have been kicked out of the process of budget making as a Senate, unconstitutionally. And Senator Umtata has this matter in court. If you read the Constitution, it's very clear that Parliament includes both the Senate and the National Assembly. That referral of Article 115 talks about Parliament. As a demonstration of good faith, Mr. President, retract your referral to the National Assembly and send it to both houses, the Senate and the National Assembly. Because that is what the Constitution says. And even in budget making process, Article 249(3) talks about Parliament shall allocate adequate funds to enable each commission and independent offices to operate. Why have we overlooked this? When you insist on Article 109(5) that talks about introduction of the bill in the National Assembly, that is just introducing. Article 109(3) talks about considered, and considered appears in many parts of the Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, part of the problem is that the process of budget making, including finance bill, must involve the Senate. So that if the National Assembly does not do the right thing, Senate, a house of reason, will tell them no. And it will tell them no in a big way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me also talk about public debt. I think it's important for us to audit the public debt. Let us know the exact debt that we have. Let people not be telling us we have this debt and we don't have any statement of debt. We don't have any audit report. I think this should be one of the major proposals to come from this. And even as we audit our debt, let us think about institutions which are consuming public funds and they are unconstitutional. First ladies, second ladies, prime cabinet secretary's wife, we all have wives and we were elected. If you are elected and you are earning a salary, let your wife use your salary to do the things he's doing. Husband. Let that money come from your salary. Let us not be told that we elected a leader and governors have started doing the same. Yes. They have started doing as a first wives governor, whatever. Iyo maneno tuwachane nayo. We must, in fact, the president said in the interview from Monday, we want to see it communicated officially. Because he has not done that officially. Those offices are bloated. Last 2 weeks, when this matter had started, the first lady came near my home and met some widows, about 1,000 widows, a place called Mongoma. Talked to them and left them without anything. Just to come and play politics? I think we must relook at these offices and scrub them because they are consuming a lot of resources. Mr. Speaker, let me talk about corruption, Mr. Speaker. Corruption is a cancer in this country.
Order, honorable senators.
And if
Senator
we want
to be heard in silence, please.
If we want to do justice to this country, Mr. Speaker, let us revisit Chapter 6 of the Constitution, Leadership and Integrity Act. Can we have this chapter fully implemented? If we need to move forward.
You'll have 2 minutes to wind up, Senator Sotsi.
Mr. Speaker, the issue of reforms in the police. The Constitution had good intention. Created the office of IPOA, we created the office of Police Service Commission, but we have allowed these 2 offices to be muzzled by the IG. This is where we need to start. And if we are talking about recommendations, this is one area that we need to really recommend. But I agree with the colleagues who have said that the Inspector General of Police has failed and he must leave the office either through resignation or a removal from office. Because we have seen death under him during the Azimio protest and now during this protest. Mr. Speaker, I support, but with amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wafula.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa nafasi hii, ili vile vile nipeane rambirambi na pole kwa familia zilizopoteza wapenzi wanao katika purukushani iliyokuwa katika mji mkuu wa Kenya na viunga vyake pembe mbalimbali za nchi ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, vile vile nikushukuru kwa kujaribu kudhibiti mawimbi katika jumba la Senate. Licha ya kupeana mwelekeo, Mheshimiwa Spika, lazima sisi kama jumba la Senate tuweze kujadili kinagaubaga yale ambayo yanahusu wa Kenya katika awamu hii ya jumba la Senate. Mheshimiwa Spika, katika jumba hili kuna vitengo mbalimbali vya uongozi na kamati mbalimbali za uongozi. Mara tena na tena kumekuwa na ripoti zinazoletwa hapa Senate kuhusiana na ubadhirifu wa pesa za umma, ukabila na mambo mengine ambayo haendi sambamba na matarajio ya Wakenya. Sasa tumekuwa hapa karibu miaka miwili, Mheshimiwa Spika, na kile ninajaribu kuwaomba viongozi wa kamati hizi. Kaunti ya Garissa imekuwa na changamoto, ufisadi, kuandikwa kwa watu pasipo kufuata misingi ya katiba na kadhalika. Lakini jumba la Senate halijachukua msimamo kupeana mwelekeo na kupeana makataa ya siku ngapi zinazotarajiwa majibu yatekelezwe na nyenzo mbalimbali za nchi ya Kenya. Mimi naomba Mheshimiwa Spika, jumba la Senate na la kitaifa lisiwe jumba la kupiga miayo na kulia pasipo kutekeleza kwa mujibu wa katiba. Kaunti ya Migori, kaunti ya Trans Nzoia, kaunti mbalimbali zote zina changamoto ambazo taasisi na kamati hapa bunge zinajua kuna shida na tunajua suluhisho ziko wapi. Naomba kutoka leo Mheshimiwa Spika, kando na kujieleza na kupeana madawa kama Panado kwa Wakenya, lazima tupeane matibabu ya kweli kwa wakati unaostahili. KRA imekuwa inaandika watu, Mheshimiwa Spika, kamati husika ina takwimu za kuthibitishwa, lakini bado hatujachukua hatua ya kuwaita waliohusika kuandika watu kinyume cha katiba ili wang'atuke katika ofisi na taratibu zinazotakikana kufuatwa zifuatwe. Wizara ya Kawi vile vile imekuwa na awamu ya kuandika watu. Hatujaona kamati hizi zikileta ripoti viongozi hawa waweze kuwajibika. Na mimi naomba Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa sababu Mheshimiwa Rais, kitengo cha walio wengi katika bunge, sasa tunazungumza lugha ya Wakenya, tuweze sasa kuonyesha kwa vitendo kutoka sasa kwenda mbele. Mheshimiwa Spika, nilipong'atuka hapa ili kujaribu kumwambia Mheshimiwa Otsotsi yale aliyo moyoni mwangu, kile nimegundua Mheshimiwa Spika, vile vile kumekuwa na taratibu ama falsafa ya muungano ama handshake ambayo imeonekana hapa Kenya. Katika awamu iliyopita kulikuwa na lawama. Katika awamu hii tumeona kana kwamba kuna mahaba fulani, uhuba fulani. Wakati unaostahili watu wananyamaza, lakini watu wanapoongea huenda wako njaa. Mheshimiwa Spika, wa Kenya wanauliza haya maswali. Wakati mambo yanatakana kuongelewa watu wamenyamaza. Ndio vijana wameamuka sasa katika kaunti. Angalia wizara za vijana katika kaunti zote nchi ya Kenya. 99% sio vijana, na ni mawaziri wanaosimamia vijana katika kaunti zetu. Angalia kazi zinapotangazwa katika kaunti zetu, vijana hawapewi nafasi. Wao ni kuangalia kwa video na simu za rununu. Kandarasi zinazopewa Mheshimiwa Spika, kitaifa na katika kaunti, vijana hawapewi. Huku Nairobi vijana hawapewi kazi kule mashinani. Lazima tuonekane tukisema na kutenda. Na mimi naomba Mheshimiwa Spika, sisi sasa tuache kwenda mikutano Mombasa na kadhalika kuandika ripoti. Tupewe fedha za kutosha, twende mashinani tuchunge pesa tunazopeleka mashinani. Tumekuwa na kamati ya ugatuzi kule Bungoma tukiangalia soko. Tumekuwa na Mheshimiwa Osoti katika Vihiga County kule mashinani. Tumekuwa Wajia, tumejionea kwa macho Mheshimiwa Spika, pesa zetu. Wakenya wanapigana kwa sababu hali ya maisha imepanda, wanashtumu jumba la kitaifa, lakini hapa mashinani katika kaunti wanakamuliwa polepole pasipo wao kujua. Na sasa sisi tuna mjadala hapa na mswada wa public participation, mahusiano ya Wakenya na viongozi. Tupeleke mchakato huu pale mashinani, wajue bajeti za kaunti zinaandikwa vipi, takwimu za kaunti ziko vipi, na wao watanufaika vipi kutokana na jasho lao ambalo kwao tunapeleka pesa mashinani. Sasa mimi Mheshimiwa Spika, naungana na Wakenya wote. Juzi tumeona waziri wa afya, waziri wa elimu na baadhi ya wabunge katika nchi ya Kenya wakipeana barua za kazi kana kwamba ni barua za watoto kwenda kuleta karo kutoka nyumbani. Sehemu zingine maelfu ya watoto wetu wamepiga foleni kutafuta kazi za ualimu. Kwingine watoto wanapiga magoti, wanaponyosha mikono juu barua inawapiga kifuani. tutawakimbilia nani? Hawa watoto watamkimbilia nani? Watawalilia nani? Iwapo baadhi ya wale wanapeana hizi barua tunawajua, ni majirani zetu, ni mandugu zetu, lakini hatujaona viongozi wakisimama kidete kwa kataza mawaziri kwamba muache kutumia mbinu za mkato kuwapa watoto wenu kazi, ili hali wetu wa mashinani wanajionea kwa macho. Lazima tuseme ukweli, Mheshimiwa Spika. Haijalishi wewe unatoka kabila gani, cha muhimu tenda wema, nenda zako. Mimi ni miongoni mwa wale vijana chipukizi katika jumba la Senate. Yale ninaona hapa, wengine wanapiga kelele, Mheshimiwa Spika, wanatoa machozi ya mamba. Wanatoa machozi ya mamba, Mheshimiwa Spika. Lakini nyuma ya tent pale, yale wanayosema, wanayofanya ni kinyume ya yale wanasema katika vipaza sauti. Na kutoka sasa kwenda mbele, Mheshimiwa Spika, wacha fisi adhihirike kuwa fisi na kondoo adhihirike kuwa kondoo, ili Wakenya wapate manufaa ya jumba la Senate. Tumekuwa na kamati ya ukulima, Mheshimiwa Spika. Jumba la kitaifa wameandika ripoti wakatangaza. Sisi Senate tumetembea pembe mbalimbali, tukajionea kwa macho mbolea gushi ilitumiwa mfumo upi na wale waliohusika. Leo hii tuko hapa Senate, Mheshimiwa Spika. Ripoti iko wapi? Ripoti iko wapi? Waliotajwa wako serikali, waliohusika marafiki zako wao wako hapa. Tuseme ukweli, Mheshimiwa Spika. Tuache mzaha na Wakenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, sitaki kupita hapa ni kuambia vijana wa nchi ya Kenya, wengi wasifikirie kujamaza kwetu hatujui, tunajua. Na sasa vidonda vitafinywa, ukweli utasemwa. Na iwapo una kazi katika kamati yoyote hapa Senate, fanya kazi yako. Na mimi naomba, Mheshimiwa Spika, unajua kuna kamati ambazo zinajadili takwimu na pesa za counties na serikali. Na kila mara tunapokaa hapa, Mheshimiwa Spika, unagundua pale palipo minofu na palipo magavana ambao wana uzito kidogo, baadhi yao hawaji hapa, wako kwingine, wanapangua na kupanga. Ukweli useme, Mheshimiwa Spika, hili donda sugu lazima tutatue. Wanakandarasi, wana biashara za kaunti mbalimbali hawajalipwa, wengine zaidi ya miaka 10. Magavana hawalipi. Tunapodai walipwe hapa, kuna utepetevu wa kudhibiti na kuhakikisha sheria zinafuatwa na wanabiashara walipwe. Kwa nini? Ni kwa sababu baadhi ya viongozi wana mahaba ya kisiasa na magavana na viongozi, ili kuwafinya wanyonge, hawapate peremende na waishi maisha yao. Sasa nataka kuona mabadiliko, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kando na kuzungumza kizungu kizuri ama Kiswahili, tunataka kuona mabadiliko kwa vitendo. Mheshimiwa Spika, kuna sehemu za nchi hii miundombinu barabara ni nzuri. Hata barabara zingine ng'ombe wanalala wakiota jua, Mheshimiwa Spika. Lakini zingine, Mheshimiwa Spika, wengine wanashangaa wako Kenya gani? Na mawaziri wa miundombinu na barabara wanatembea kwa ndege za kitaifa, simu za bei juu, kizungu sijui wamekitoa wapi, ili hali Wakenya wanauliza, hata sisi tunatoa ushuru, mbona tushughulikiwi? Lakini tukiuliza tunaambiwa nini? Asilimia yako ni ngapi katika serikali? Na kama ni asilimia, si utuambie asilimia ya watu wa mkoa Magharibi ni ngapi tulipe? Kama ni 1% tulipe ushuru 1%. Na jambo la ukabila, Mheshimiwa Spika, tusijifiche hapa. Ukabila ni donda sugu katika Kenya. Watu wawache kusema tu sisi ni nchi moja. Kama wanataka tujadili ukabila, tuweke hoja bunge tujadili ukabila. Kama ni uwezo wa kuzaa tujadili. Kama ni uwezo wa kuoa tujadili, ili tutatue hili jambo la ukabila. Tumeona juzi kila mtu anasema watu wangu. Kwani nani hana watu? Hata Yesu wa Tongareni ana watu, my friend. Na iwapo Kenya hii lazima isonge mbele, lazima tuonane jicho kwa jicho, tuitane ndugu na dada kwa upendo wa Mungu, tutende haki, vizazi vijavyo vitushukuru kwa wema ambayo tunafanya sasa. So kwa hayo mengi, Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa sababu nchi nzima inanitazama, mimi niko tayari kupambana kuhakikisha nchi ni moja, Wakenya ni wamoja, kila mtu apate haki yake na tusonge mbele. Kwa hayo mengi, na Mungu awabariki sana. Mungu awabariki serikali ya nchi ya Kenya. Thank you.
Senator Faki. Senator Faki, I'm informed that Senator Kavindu needs to...
Yes, she indicated that she is unwell.
Absolutely, so just indulge.
Thank you.
Senator Kavindu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Senator Faki, for giving me the opportunity to speak before you. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to speak on this motion of the State of the Nation today. I want to congratulate every senator who was here yesterday because of the lack of quorum yesterday, we sat and we came up with this. And I want to thank each one of them for coming up with this, because it is a crucial moment. It is a very timely moment for us to be in the House today to debate this motion. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by sending my condolences to the families of those who died, the Gen Zs who died through the brutality of the police. Mr. Speaker, our Constitution, Article 37, talks of every person has a right to peacefully and unharmed assemble and demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions to the public authorities. Mr. Speaker, I'm so saddened by the 6 or 8 Gen Zs who were killed when they were coming to Parliament to bring their petitions, and yet they were doing their rightful demonstrations. Mr. Speaker, the police, through their leader, the IG, have no right to shoot with live bullets. They would have used blank bullets and tear gas to dispatch our young people. Mr. Speaker, as a mother, I was in this Senate that day, and every time I had a bullet shot, my stomach was like leaving my body as a mother, because I knew that's a bullet which has hit a child. Mr. Speaker, I didn't know what to do. But they would have been allowed just to come. We've had many people in the gallery, the Speaker's gallery and the public gallery, to listen, and even we've had many people bring their petitions here, and we have dealt with them. I want to condole with the families and tell the Gen Zs of Kenya, first of all, I want to congratulate them, because we are here today discussing this motion because they came out. Why? Because they are fed up with the state of the nation and how they are living as our young people. And surely, Mr. Speaker, I saw one of them admitted in Kenyatta National Hospital, and he was saying that he was shot on the back, but thank God he was shot together with Eric Chalo Mutisia. Chalo Mutisia lost his life. But this one survived and he was in a hospital. And he was saying that he's demonstrating because he has been looking for a job for the last 10 years since he graduated. And many of them have even more than 10 years. Mr. Speaker, they have all rights to demonstrate and to ask the government to provide them with jobs. There are ways, Mr. Speaker, of providing these young people with jobs, because 30% of all jobs in the counties, the 47 counties, belong to the youth, women, and people living with disability. If these jobs, together with the national government, are given to them rightfully without partiality, Mr. Speaker, these children will have jobs, even as others do the jobs that they do through the internet. Mr. Speaker, it has become so difficult for our young people even to get police jobs and army jobs. I've heard many of them saying that they've been asked to give bribes to amounts of like 300,000. I've had cases where parents have approached me telling me that they've sold piece of land to bribe for their jobs, for their children to get jobs, and they've not been able to be employed. Mr. Speaker, I want to call upon the President of the country of Kenya, because I know he listens, and I know he has humor, to see what he can do to these young people and provide jobs for them. I looked at him the other day as he was being interviewed, and I saw a king without a covering, a naked king. Why? Because he was there, he was being asked questions about people he gave jobs who are not doing their jobs the way they should be doing their jobs, and they were nowhere to be seen. Mr. Speaker, it's a shame. It's a shame. I want to call upon the CSs to take their mandate and do their jobs the way they should do their jobs and cover the president, because they are there, not covering him as in not failing to do their jobs, but they should do their jobs the way they are mandated to do their jobs. If they do their jobs properly, Mr. Speaker, without corruption, nobody will go to the streets to demonstrate. Mr. Speaker, I want to stand and say, all of us as a country and as a nation, as leaders, we have failed. Because many other times, even here in the Senate, we take sides on partisan. And we do what our parties are guiding us to do. And we forget that we have been sent here by Kenyans who elected us to come and represent them. And many times we pass even laws that are against them. Mr. Speaker, as we reflect from the president to the least in this country, we must now think and see how we will work to bring sanity to our country, to bring sanity to Parliament, to bring sanity to every organization in this country. And Mr. Speaker, many of these issues are happening because people are given directions on how to vote. And even when a law is hurting, because of the directions, they still go ahead and vote. And a good example is this bill, 2024 financial bill. The Parliament voted yes, and it passed. What happened next? The President failed to sign. Why? Because people were not happy with it. It's a shame, even to the Parliament. We should stand and do what is right for the people who send us. I am calling upon the AG and the IPOA to do what is right and bring justice. Mr. Speaker, many are the times, like many of the senators who have gone ahead of me have said, cases of corruption, they are there, they are very clear, but they just disappear somewhere. Cases are taken to courts. Justice is never done. Very few people get justice in Kenya, especially the poor. And they stay at home knowing that I can go to court and this is rightfully mine, especially land issues. They know this is my land, but somebody somewhere has grabbed the land, or the land has been sold to them because they have money. This poor person cannot even dare go to court. Why? Because they know even if they go to court, this person will go and bribe the court and they'll never get justice. I'm dealing with so many cases of land in Machakos, and I know what I'm talking about. It is a high time every institution reflects and we come back to Namasi and we do what is right for our people if we don't want Kenya to go into the ruins. Mr. Speaker, we are talking here, but I pray and I request that all the discussions that we are discussing here today and the debate is going to go into this motion and is going to be implemented. Mr. Speaker, the young people have said it all through media, social media, but I want to call upon the young people, the Gen Zs. You are free to bring your petitions to this Senate, and we will discuss them and we will implement them. Even if there is nowhere else you can be heard, at the Senate you'll be heard. Sit down or communicate in the way that you are communicating and send your petitions to the Senate. We will deal with it. And even before then, we will continue talking and saying what you are saying. Mr. Speaker, these children are crying for jobs. They are crying to see everything being done in the proper manner. And Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to all of us through a scripture in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 1 and verse 18. It says, come, we reason together. It is a time for Kenyans to come together and reason together. Mr. President, reason together with your people. We are here to work for the goodness of this country. We do not want bloodshed, and we are demanding for those who have been arrested through demonstrations, demonstrating without violence, to be released with immediate effect. And those who have died, they should be assisted in burial, because some of them come from very poor families, like Rex comes from a single mother. He has no father, he has nobody else, he has nowhere. He lives with his grandmother, and the mother is suffering, trying to see how she can bury her son. So I'm calling upon the President and all the organization and even this Senate to intervene and contribute so that some of these people can be buried honorably, like some of the senators have said, especially those who were killed here at Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we've nullified the shift in delegated legislation, and we want to see all the statutes and the laws that are going to be made in this country to be favorable to the people of Kenya. And if we do that, Mr. Speaker, it will be well, and our people will settle, and they will be happy, and they will live. We will live in a peaceful country. Kenya is a country where every other country runs here as refugees, and they stay here peacefully. And they are wondering when they are seeing Kenya running the way it is running. I am calling upon each one of us to reflect, and even as we reflect, let us do the right thing for our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Senator Miraj.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kuweza kunipa fursa hii dhahabia na mimi niweze kutoa changizo zangu kwenye masuala ya kijamii ambayo yanaendelea katika taifa letu. Na nitangulize kwa kumshukuru Mwenyezi Mungu kwa kuweza leo kuwa na amani katika taifa letu hadi sisi kuweza kukaa katika kikao hiki. Pili, nitume rambirambi zangu kwa wale walioondokewa na vipenzi wao, watoto wao, waume zao na hata watoto wao wanaokwenda shule. Kwa hakika majuma haya mawili ambao yametupa kisogo hivi sasa yametutingisa sisi kama jamii, kama taifa. Bwana Spika, nianze kwa kutanguliza ya kwamba gumzo linaloendelea hivi sasa ni kana kwamba ugatuzi umeondoka katika taifa la Kenya, kwa sababu anayenyoshewa kidole cha lawama ni rais wa taifa la Kenya peke yake. Na itakuwa ni unafiki mkubwa nisipoliangazia hili, kwa sababu tuko na magatuzi 47 ambayo yanaendeshwa na magavana. Na sisi haswa kama maseneta, Bwana Spika, ni wasimamizi wa magatuzi haya 47. Lakini kwa sababu tumeitwa, ni lazima tuitike na tuoneshe uongozi kwa taifa la Kenya ya kwamba